A single thunderous crash echoed across the dark Brazilian countryside, so loud it rattled the windows of nearby farmhouses. For a moment, everything went still. Then it came again, the rapid pounding of hundreds of hooves tearing through soil, smashing wooden posts, and ripping crops from the earth. It wasn't a storm, it wasn't an earthquake, it was a herd of wild boars charging with the unstoppable force that only desperation can create. Before we dive into today's investigation, hit subscribe so you don't miss real stories from the front lines of rural Brazil. Under the weak glow of the moon, the boars swept into the fields. Corn snapped like brittle sticks. Cassava disappeared into mud. Sugarcane bowed under the weight of bodies plowing through it. Farmers had lived this nightmare before, but this time something changed. The herd suddenly halted. Confused grunts echoed, and then dozens of animals tumbled forward, sliding into darkness. Hidden beneath brush and barely visible from above was a trench, deep, steep, and wide enough to swallow their momentum. Boars scrambled, slipped, and clawed against the dirt walls, filling the pit with frantic movement. Those still standing froze, rumbled nervously, and then turned back into the night. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a farm. This was survival. This was Brazil's newest defense against an invasive species spiraling out of control. Across southern and southeastern Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, Santa Catarina, São Paulo, rural families are fighting a silent war. Wild boars, known as javalis, and the even stronger hybrid Java porcos now roam in massive numbers. They arrive like a living storm and leave entire hectares destroyed by sunrise. Plant, grow, hope, and watch it vanish overnight. Farmers tried everything. Electric fences worked until boars learned to break them. Chemical repellents washed away. Wooden posts snapped. Hunting helped but couldn't keep up. Traps caught some, but not the hundreds that tore through fields at once. So farmers asked a different question. Instead of keeping boars out, what if they simply couldn't cross? No electricity, no chemicals, just earth. A physical barrier as old as human civilization. That was the birth of the trench strategy. At first, neighbors laughed. It looked absurd, like a medieval fortification around a cornfield. But when the first farmer found his crops untouched the next morning, opinions shifted fast. Another tried it, then another. Soon word spread, the trenches worked. A wild boar can bulldoze fences and uproot crops, but it cannot leap over a steep, unpredictable gap or climb a slick dirt wall. The trenches stop them without shock, poison, or panic, simply by turning the land itself into a barrier. But this solution came with challenges. Digging trenches is no small job. Clay-packed soil, rocky terrain, machinery sinking in mud during the rainy season, bone-hard ground during droughts. Every meter carved from the earth demands time, fuel, and labor. For some families, the cost was impossible. For larger farms, the scale overwhelming. Yet the alternative, losing a year's income in one night, was worse. And boars weren't the only threat. Peccaries, smaller but faster, swept through fields in tight groups, tearing everything apart. Capybaras, deceptively gentle-looking, grazed crops to the root and triggered weed outbreaks and soil erosion. Each species required trenches deep enough, wide enough, and steep enough to stop them. Shallow ditches failed. Too narrow became a step. Too wide wasted resources. Farmers refined the ideal shape, around 1 to 1.5 meters deep with steep walls. Then nature tested their work. Heavy rains turned trenches into muddy channels. Walls collapsed. Standing water brought mosquitoes and disease. Farmers realized these defenses needed maintenance. Drainage channels, reinforced walls, sometimes even stone or compacted layers to keep their structure through storms. The trenches evolved. Some stretched like winding rivers around farmland. Others formed segmented systems across hills. They became symbols of a rural population done waiting for outside help. Solutions drawn not from technology, but from ingenuity and determination. A line in the earth, a message to the invaders, not here, not anymore. But as the trenches spread, so did whispers across rural towns. What if the Boers learned to avoid them? A real fear, a growing one. In the next chapter of the struggle, that fear, soft at first, then growing louder each season, spread quietly from farmer to farmer. Wild boars aren't foolish creatures. They've adapted to every barrier humans have ever built. They learned to break fences, avoid traps, outsmart electric lines, and slip through forests with unsettling intelligence. So the idea that they might eventually learn to go around the trenches felt disturbingly realistic. Because what happens when only some farms build trenches and others don't? A single trench protects one field. A network of trenches protects an entire region. Unless the strategy spreads collectively, the Boers will simply shift their routes, devastating the weakest point in the chain. That realization pushed rural communities to organize like never before. Farmers met on weekends not to socialize, but to strategize. Maps covered kitchen tables. Satellite images were marked with pencil lines showing drainage paths and natural choke points. Trenches needed to connect, forming a coordinated defense grid where every gap became a potential breach. It was no longer a single farmer's battle. It was a territorial defense system. Entire districts pooled resources, sharing machinery, fuel, and labor. Engineers, sometimes relatives, sometimes neighbors, evaluated slopes and soil types. The trenches grew larger, deeper, and smarter. But the enemy evolved too. Brazil's invasive boars weren't just feeding, they were thriving. The hybrid Java porcos, combining the strength of wild boars with the intelligence of domestic pigs, became larger, faster, and more unpredictable. They tore open irrigation lines, knocked over water tanks, and ventured dangerously close to family homes. Reports of attacks on calves and lambs became common. Trenches transformed from an experiment into a necessity. Yet trenches alone could never solve the core issue: exploding population numbers. A single female boar produces 2 litters a year, with up to 10 offspring each time. One season can add thousands of animals to a region. Trenches slow destruction, but they don't reduce the population behind it. That's why many communities turn to population control. Brazilian law tightly regulates boar hunting, requiring authorization and safety procedures. Still, in some areas, controlled hunts with certified dogs and trained teams became essential. This sparked debate, environmentalists warning about ecosystem impact, hunters arguing that without intervention, the damage would be far worse. Caught in the middle were farmers simply trying to protect their land. And wild boars weren't the only threat. Peccaries stormed fields in tight, fast groups, destroying crops before farmers even woke. Capybaras grazed slowly but relentlessly, creating patches of bare soil that triggered weeds and erosion. Each species behaved differently, and trenches had to be built to stop all three. Over time, the trenches evolved. Some gained compacted soil layers, others stone reinforcements, and many incorporated drainage systems to withstand heavy rains. Farmers became part-time engineers, designing structures that could survive both animals and weather. Still, rugged terrain forced some regions to add hybrid defenses: strategic fencing near cliffs, stone mounds on rocky hills, and occasionally short electrified sections. Farmers don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect solutions. The animals won't wait. The destruction doesn't pause. And the heartbreak often comes at dawn. Farmers walking into fields they spent months nurturing, only to find devastation. You hear it in their voices: frustration, exhaustion, but also determination. Because to them, agriculture is more than a job. It's identity, it's survival, it's legacy. So when you see fields surrounded by trenches, you're not looking at something primitive. You're looking at a front line, a defense wall built not with steel or electricity, but with willpower and the knowledge that nature can be unforgiving. And while farmers sleep, those trenches stand guard, silent, sturdy, waiting for the next wave of hooves. It may look simple, but it's brilliant. It's effective. It's a lifeline because every harvest exists thanks to someone who drew a line in the earth and said, "Not tonight, not on my land." The war continues, the trenches deepen, and Brazil's farmers keep fighting for the soil that feeds them all.